My name is Dr. James Pogue, and I will be your guide as we dig into bias, both conscious and unconscious. This training is not an attempt to get you to change what you believe. Instead, one of our goals is to more deeply understand how what we believe impacts our decision-making, our leadership, our teams, and our organizations, especially here at Informs. To start and continue this conversation, we need to ensure we align on language. Too often, conversations about sensitive topics like this one can be derailed because participants are simply using the same words, but they mean different things to different people. Now let's be candid. Many of you have had bias training of one kind or another before, from a variety of sources, perhaps even including your employer. This is a good thing and should help to accelerate our progress together. Today, however, we will be taking an Informs approach to this work, meaning that in terms of terminology, examples, and hopeful outcomes, we are working within the umbrella of who Informs is and what it does. Now, I mentioned an alignment on language just a moment ago. Let's get started with this first. For the purposes of this session, I'm asking that you consider the following definition for diversity. Simply put, the quality of being different or unique at individual and group levels. Everything about you and me that is different, or for that matter, similar. As you know, Informs has a strategic focus to examine diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. This is a strong and important step. This exploration is undergirded by the Informs diversity statement published on Informs website, along with the definitions for diversity and inclusion. A diversity statement is critical, and it is strengthened when associated with equally understood definitions for diversity and inclusion. Perhaps you have heard this quote from Verna Myers: "Diversity is being asked to the party, inclusion is being asked to dance." I'd ask you to align with me on the following definition that drills down just a bit more. Inclusion is a strategy to leverage diversity and the result of meaningful interactions, the result of beliefs and values, and the result of decision-making and outcomes. Next, let's talk a little about bias. Bias is a prejudgment in favor or against a person or group. Bias comes in two forms: conscious and unconscious. Conscious biases are triggered by our brain's quick judgment of people and situations. It happens automatically, and it is deeply influenced by our backgrounds. And we know what it is. It is conscious. Unconscious bias, on the other hand, includes all the definitions associated with conscious bias, but there is more. The component that makes unconscious bias so much more troublesome and challenging to root out is that we are unaware that it is present. It is out of our visibility and accordingly out of our control. To be clear, just because it is unconscious doesn't mean it can't be changed. I think we all know that the human brain is pliable and we are capable of growth and change. That is why Informs has sponsored this training. Now that we have some alignment on these three definitions, we can begin to peel back the onion layers just a bit more. There are components of diversity, the quality of being different or unique at individual and group levels, that inform or undergird inclusion and bias. And some have more weight in our lives than others. We call these the DIBS Big Eight. The DIBS Big Eight are the big boulders of diversity in our lives. They are a part of our lives that if we were asked to change them, it would dramatically change how we see the world and how the world sees us. Consider socioeconomics, for example. Imagine your family's annual income when you're about 12 years old. Now consider how things would be different if you were to add 3 zeros to this number. What might this change about the neighborhood or country that you lived, the schools you attended, your opportunity at the best schools both to get in and to pay the tuition? Moving forward, how might this have impacted your current work and your career? Whether it was your path to academia or your place in industry. Now let's go back to the original 12-year-old annual income and let's subtract 3 zeros this time. For some of us, this would place us squarely within some of the worst poverty in the world. What neighborhood are you living in now? What school are you attending now? What are your opportunities for the best schools or school at all? Moving forward, how might this have impacted your current work and your career? One other example for your consideration is gender expression. For all of us, this impacts how we enter the world and how the world sees us. Now imagine if you woke up tomorrow and you had a different gender expression. How might you see the world differently? How might the world see you differently? The point here is that while all components of diversity deserve to be acknowledged, they have different weight or influence in our lives. As you know, when folks enter the conversation of diversity, they often come through the door of race and ethnicity or perhaps gender. It is important to know that there are critical components of diversity that are outside of these areas, especially in an environment like Informs. Off the top of my head, I can think of a few others: employer type, degree level, alma mater, business school or engineering school. What did you attend? And I'm sure we could come up with more if we sat down and talked about it. So with this as a backdrop, let's jump into a discussion about the top 5 biases. The first of these biases is the affinity bias. In the intro, did you hear the voice that talked about the two folks having the same graduate advisor and referencing a club that one must be in order to get an opportunity? This is a way of understanding affinity bias. People or professionals who are like me, I am more comfortable with. This can refer to academic preparation or reputation. It can refer to someone attending the same type of school, or it can refer to a club that one needs to belong to in order to be seen as good or in. Take a moment to reflect on the following comments. I know this program is strong. I trust people I know. People I know are competent. Is the reverse of these statements true? Are programs you do not know weak? Do you not trust people you do not know? Are people you do not know incompetent? Consider that. Now let's move to halo effect. This is when the general opinion of a person affects a specific action we might take. Following up on a comment from earlier, it could be when someone is from a particular school that has a stellar reputation, and we infer that the graduate of this program must therefore also be stellar. The reverse happens as well. When we say a colleague attended a lesser known institution or works for a large organization versus a small consultancy, and this results in an action we take. Might this impact, for example, invitations to keynote or plenary speakers by conference organizing committees? How informed societies select individuals to serve on their panel discussions or serve as conference session chairs? Or even the selection of award winners or editorial board members for Informs journals. I ask you to think about some other areas that halo effect is likely having an impact around you. You may consider it in a different way. Is it possible that you have been a recipient of the benefit of halo effect? Next on our list of biases is perception bias. A fun example of perception bias relates to those of us who have sold a house before. Some of us were the type of homeowner who cooked an apple pie or cookies and left them for potential buyers as they were touring your home. Others of us may have placed scented oils or fragrant flowers throughout the home. All of these were designed to evoke the potential buyer into a feeling of home, that this place feels like, smells like, could be their next home. This is a clear use of perception bias for the purposes of some benefit for the seller and buyer. Let me shift the sense for a moment to the sense of hearing. The same can be said of accents. Consider various accents you have been exposed to from around the world. Then ask yourself the tough question. Which ones seem to evoke the idea that someone is smarter, better educated, better prepared? Which ones suggest that someone is less than, less smart, less capable, less quick, simply less? Whether Northern or Southern, whether European or otherwise, whether West or East Asian, Central or Southern American, West or East African, accents matter, and in some cases, they have impacted decisions we make that advantage candidates or awardees and speakers. With Informs being an organization that welcomes professionals from around the world, this unconscious bias may have impacted on the how and the who. Next, we have the confirmation effect. Simply put, this is when we are prone to believe what we wanted to believe anyway. This may be a good time to remind us of the difference between conscious and unconscious bias. Remember that conscious bias is when we are aware, and unconscious is when we are not. But for both, they happen automatically and are triggered by our prejudgment of people and situations. For example, when a colleague from a well-known institution makes an insightful comment, we may respond with an, "Of course, they were trained at XYZ institution or studied with these established professors." But what would we say if this was a person, or this person made a comment that was not so enlightened? Would our comments be closer to, "That's surprising. I would have expected more from a graduate of XYZ institution"? This is confirmation bias at work, where we are expecting, consciously or unconsciously, for a person to behave in a certain way because of what they have been exposed to, because of our exposure to previous situations, because of what we have engaged in, not because of their talent nor their ability. This can begin to replicate itself as well, and often takes the form of, "We need someone with experience to serve on this committee." Let's be plain. Of course, experience matters, but it matters in both directions. We need to know that when we over-index on experience as a pre-confirmation of success, we preclude other generations of talent from having a seat at the idea table. While for some of us it was a little bit ago, it is important to remember that we were all once, for example, first-time committee members, first-time journal reviewers, first-time session chairs, and the like. We must remember to give a hand to the next generation and others. Groupthink is our last bias. When groupthink is driving decision-making, one can see many of the previous biases taking root and becoming the foundation for decisions that are not equitable nor inclusive. Have you been in a meeting and heard or said, "Oh, they're an industry. They won't have a good perspective on this topic. Never heard of them. Are they new to informs? Maybe next time. I'm not sure we should ask her to serve because she won't have time. She's a new mom." Don't take offense. That's just how they talk. What did you do when it happened? When groupthink is in place, the power of the group can cause us to stay silent, ignore, or push past the scratchy or wounding comment that really needs to be addressed. The pressure to conform or keep the calm may hurt the decisions that impact informs. In truth, it is the smallest of the comments, the microaggressions, that are most challenging. This is also where much of the traction and growth can happen as well. So let's take a moment to reflect. We started with the definitions and reviewed the 5 top biases. Now let's talk about what you can do to help reduce the negative impacts of these biases. And remember, just because we have biases that are unconscious doesn't mean it isn't our duty to manage our biases and change our behaviors. Here are some ideas. While Informs has criteria for decision-making around awards, keynotes, committee members, and other critical decisions, think about how you make your evaluations. Before judging a competition, reviewing an article, or the like, take a quiet moment to think about the biases that you may have and how you might counteract them during the upcoming discussion. Actively question yourself and try to catch yourself when you might be using one of the DIBS Big 8 characteristics, or employer type, or something else, to make a judgment. In fact, if your judgment is negative, try to reframe it. Pause and ask yourself, could this trait be a positive? Establish decision-making rules that require and expect decision makers to question one another's thinking, their assumptions, and yes, their biases. If you're seeing others bow to the pressure of conformity and groupthink, be brave, speak up. Be respectful, speak up. Be authentic, but yes, speak up. Try to expand your network. We know it is easier and faster to select people you know. For example, to serve on your editorial board, win an award, or serve on your committee. One way to reduce this is to expand your network and include those who may not look like you or have the same research interests. As you reach out to increase your network, I ask you also to think about increasing your empathy for others who have different backgrounds or journeys in the OR and analytics profession. Empathy has been shown to reduce biases. Assume and act in good faith. Understand that when we are in the beginnings of questioning one another's biases, that occasionally someone may say something awkward that is designed to address the bias, but scratches the person. Work hard to give grace and understanding. The work of unpacking, seeing, and learning to improve around biases is difficult. It's difficult for all of us. Lastly, From time to time, we have all made bias-related decisions that resulted in someone being scratched, harmed, wounded, or hurt in some other way. I encourage you to use this as a point of motivation to improve as opposed to a place to stay stuck. Leading an industry, an organization, a department, an association, or oneself through a bias reduction process is challenging work, but it is not impossible. I wish you the best of luck, and I encourage you to watch this video once, twice, 3 times or more. And I'd ask you to consider reaching out to your colleagues and having the uncomfortable conversation, which may start with, are we really like this? Am I? And continue with, how can we help each other? How can we be better? How can I help informs be better?